Actually, we talked about risky areas, and it was Transparency International Hungary who published a very nice study about red flags, which could be even used as an indicator. So, welcome, Mr. Dolan from Transparency International.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laszlo. And as you mentioned in your introduction, I'm the director of the Transparency International EU office. But we're essentially the mouthpiece in Brussels for our 24 national chapters and partners all around the European Union. And we are, as a network, as a movement, very, very supportive of this initiative, not only in Hungary, but in the other member states as well. And our national chapters will be busily promoting this citizens' initiative in those countries as well. We're supportive for two reasons. One, that's part of our DNA. We're an anti-corruption and anti-fraud organization, so who could disagree with a citizens' initiative like Stop Fraud? But secondly, we were also very supportive of the European Public Prosecutor's Office. When I was digging around in the archives for this press conference, I found a policy paper dating from 2003 where we said there should be something like the European Public Prosecutors. And now, 15 years later, we're almost there, but still we're disappointed to see that a number of countries have opted out of that voluntary procedure, including Hungary and Poland, Sweden, my own country, Ireland, which I'm very disappointed to see. And so I think that just shows that maybe some people accuse NGOs of being a bit short-termist, but we're in this for the long run. We're a very practical organization in our approach to stopping corruption and fraud. So I want to speak just very briefly about two practical things that could be done if we get this citizens' initiative through. But this is about putting in place stricter, maybe more intrusive controls for countries that don't sign up to the public policy. The first is about a concept called the Integrity Pact. Now we, together with the DG Regional Policy, have been conducting a pilot project for the last 2 or 3 years, which is to work with member states with contracting authorities in 11 member states to introduce what's called an Integrity Pact for large infrastructure projects that are funded through EU funds. And the concept is pretty simple. You get the contracting authority, the public authorities, and the bidders to sign up to enhanced transparency measures. Yeah? So they sign a contract together saying, we're going to be cleaner than clean. We're going to be squeaky clean about this project. And we're going to subject ourselves, importantly, to independent monitoring from civil society organizations. So we have 17 of these projects in 11 member states, where you have big projects funded by EU money, where Transparency International chapters can review all the material, all the documents related to that particular project. So at the moment, this is something that is voluntary for those public authorities. They can choose to do this because maybe they think it's good for their image. But what I would suggest is that one of the stronger controls that could be placed on countries that don't sign up to the public prosecutor is this kind of citizen monitoring, this kind of independent monitoring should be made mandatory for large infrastructure projects. That's just one practical example. The second example actually comes from, and I'm very glad Mr. Stas brought it up, the recent case of Mr. Babish's conflicts of interest. In fact, it was our national chapter in the Czech Republic that launched a formal complaint to the European Commission on that conflict of interest. And they did that because they discovered that despite Mr. Babish's protests to the contrary, he is indeed, in fact, the main economic beneficiary of Agrofert, this large conglomerate which received in 2017 something like 82 million in subsidies, in EU subsidies for its business. And so they found that by looking through various databases and files, and they have now asked the Commission to do something about this conflict of interest. This is because of this has happened because of the diligence, the activism of one civil society organization. But what I would say would be another good ex-ante control is that politicians in countries or public officials in countries that haven't signed up to the European Public Prosecutor should be required to submit their financial declarations to a body like OLAF, and then it would be up to OLAF to look and check to see if those financial declarations represent any conflict of interest in terms of receiving EU funds. And then OLAF would also be empowered to check and verify those information against information that is in company ownership or share ownership databases around Europe.
Is financial information about themselves, about their...
So in certainly in the Czech Republic and in most countries around Europe, high-ranking public officials and politicians are required to fill out declarations of financial interest. For example, European parliamentarians, for example.
Yeah, that is the case in Hungary also.
And they have to publish this. So so what I'm suggesting is that this would have to be submitted in cases where they're not made public, and in many cases for, say, officials, it's not public. This would have to be submitted to Olaf for verification and further scrutiny.
Sorry, only in the case if they are not public?
Well, in cases where they're public, I would suggest that Olaf should take that information anyway and have a look.
And for those member states which are not part of the Apple
Yes.
EPPO?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
sorry,
No,
just to clarify.
So those are just two practical suggestions. Maybe two final comments. I very much hope this citizens' initiative succeeds and that the Commission will take action on the basis of this initiative. But I don't think we need to wait. I think a lot of what we're discussing now can be done tomorrow, right? We're in the middle of discussing the next EU budget. We are in the middle of discussing what the rules are that will govern that budget. So the common provisions regulation will need to be discussed and agreed in the next months. And these kind of controls, these kind of measures, we believe, Transparency International believes, could be placed within the common provisions regulation. And a final comment, which was that you mentioned that this initiative stands in contradistinction to other initiatives which are about placing rule of law conditionality on EU funds, and it would be better to do it this way because that way the final beneficiaries don't suffer. Ordinary citizens who would be the beneficiaries of this funding don't suffer if the funds are suspended. The only thing I would say is I don't see it as an either or. I mean, we've written a paper about how the Commission or how the EU should place conditions, rule of law conditions on the disbursement of EU funds. And one thing we say in that is that it shouldn't be either or. You either get the funds or you don't. There should be a graded response that's possible in response to the discovery of threats to the rule of law. And one of those things, one of those intermediate actions you could take, having done an assessment of the threat to the rule of law, is indeed to put these kind of ex-ante controls in place. And the benefit of that is that that could be applied then to any member state, not just those that haven't signed up to the European Public Prosecutor. For example, I note that Malta has recently, having been encouraged, shall we say, by various international actors to sign up to the European Public Prosecutor's Office. But we still know that there are many problems in Malta with regards to fraud and corruption. So they would then be required to submit to these kind of controls as well, not just those countries who are outside of the remit of the European Public Prosecutor. So that's all from me.